Lena Marshall never believed in curses, but when she found the abandoned carnival mask buried in the mud behind her grandmother's house, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had left it there on purpose. Her best friend, Tyler Briggs, joked that it looked like something from a cheap circus, but Lena noticed details he didn't: the way the painted smile seemed too fresh, the way the hollow eyes seemed to glisten in the light. That night, both of them began hearing faint jingling bells outside their windows, even though the streets were empty. By morning, a single playing card appeared on each of their nightstands. Both cards showed the same thing: a jester, grinning wide, pointing straight at them. I didn't plan on finding the photograph. The attic had always been the part of the house I avoided. The wooden steps were unsteady, and the air up there was thick with dust and decay. But one rainy afternoon, when the storm rattled the windows and the boredom was suffocating, I decided to climb the creaking ladder and explore. The moment I pushed open the heavy attic door, the smell hit me, a mix of mold and something old that clung to the air like it had been trapped for decades. I swept my flashlight across piles of forgotten boxes and broken furniture. Dust swirled in the beam, almost alive, and the silence pressed against me, making every movement sound too loud. I crouched to sift through a box of yellowed papers and trinkets, when my light caught something pinned to the far wall. A corkboard, crooked and splintered, sagged under the weight of old photographs. Most were blurred, faceless family members frozen in time, but one picture stood out. It was a black and white photograph of a jester. His painted face was pale, lips curled into a grin too wide to be human, and his costume was decorated with sharp, diamond-shaped patterns. The photograph was old, cracked at the corners, yet the jester's eyes seemed sharper than anything else on the board, and hollow, as though they weren't just captured ink, but actual voids staring straight through me. I felt the air grow heavier. My stomach tightened. It was only a picture, yet I couldn't look away. I blinked, and for the briefest moment, I thought the grin had widened. A trick of the light, I told myself, but I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a box. The flashlight shook in my hand, scattering shadows across the walls. The attic suddenly felt smaller, as if the beams had bent inward. I tore my eyes from the picture and hurried back down the ladder, my pulse racing. That night, the photograph followed me into sleep. I dreamt I was standing in the same attic, but it wasn't filled with dust and silence anymore. It was alive with sound. Soft bells jingled somewhere in the shadows, playful but sinister, echoing in circles until I couldn't tell where they came from. Then he stepped into view. The jester was no longer flat on paper. He moved, fluid and wrong, twirling with unnatural grace. His painted face stretched into that grin, the black holes of his eyes glistening. He danced closer and closer until I could feel the air shift with each spin. My body wouldn't move. I wanted to run, but the wooden floor beneath me cracked apart, splintering into nothingness, leaving me stranded on a single board, suspended in darkness. He laughed, a sound that vibrated through my bones, high-pitched and hollow, as though a dozen voices laughed together, but none of them were human. He leaned down until his painted face filled my vision. I saw the cracks in the white makeup, the wet gleam of something alive underneath. Then he whispered, though his mouth didn't move. The sound was in my head, sharp and invasive, though I couldn't make out the words. I woke with a gasp, clutching my blanket so tightly my knuckles hurt. The room was dark, the storm still hammering at the windows. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was only a dream, that my mind had twisted the photograph into something grotesque. But when I turned to the corner of the room, my heart stopped. On the floor, just beyond the reach of my bed, lay a single playing card. I leaned forward slowly, every muscle in my body heavy with dread. The card was face-up. A jester was painted across it in bright colors, unlike the black and white photo, but the face was the same. That same grin, that same hollow gaze. I hadn't owned a deck of cards in years. I hadn't touched any box from the attic. Yet the card sat there, waiting, as though it had been placed carefully where I'd see it first. I reached down with trembling fingers, but stopped before touching it. I couldn't bring myself to. The rain outside masked the silence of the house, but even through the storm, I thought I heard it: the faint, muffled sound of bells jingling, so soft it could have been my imagination, but I knew better. The jester was not just in my dream. He had followed me out, and he wanted me to know. At the edge of the card, barely visible in the dim light, a single drop of red stained the corner. Not paint, something darker, something fresh. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Someone must have left the card there long ago, maybe tucked into an old book I'd forgotten about. My mind clung to that explanation because the truth, the possibility that it was something else, was too much to face. Still, the longer I stared at it, the less I believed my own excuses. The stain on the corner was still there, a faint red smear that looked like it had seeped into the paper. I left the card on the floor and forced myself back under the covers, though sleep never came again that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the jester's grin hovering in the dark behind them. The morning should have been a relief, but sunlight didn't wash away the unease. I walked around the card carefully, refusing to touch it, and tried to start the day like nothing had happened. But the card wasn't gone. By the time I came home from school, it had moved. It sat in the center of my desk, perfectly aligned, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. I lived alone in my room. No one had been inside. At least, no one I could see. That was when the shadows began to change. They stretched too far across the floor, curling up the walls, bending in ways light shouldn't bend. At first I thought it was just my imagination, tricks of tired eyes. But the longer I watched, the more I realized the shadows weren't just moving, they were following. My own shape on the wall would twitch a moment too late, like it was struggling to keep up with me. And sometimes, when I moved suddenly, I saw another shadow just behind mine, a figure hunched over, grinning, as if dancing in silence. The mirrors were worse. In the bathroom I bent over the sink to wash my face, desperate to shake the creeping dread. But when I looked up into the mirror I froze. My reflection was there, but something else flickered faintly in the glass. Behind me, almost too faint to notice, stood the Jester. His grin stretched wider than before, eyes blacker, teeth too sharp for paint. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. When I turned back, the mirror showed only me again. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, the ticking of the clock, the creaks of the old wooden beams, the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the window. But beneath it all, I swore I heard something else. The faint rustle of cloth, the soft chime of bells, as though someone were pacing in circles around my bed. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared into the dark, too afraid to move. In the morning, I found another card. This one was inside my backpack, tucked between my notebooks. The same Jester smiled up at me, but his pose was different this time. His arms extended wide as if inviting me in. The cards weren't random anymore. They were deliberate, placed where I couldn't miss them. Each day brought more. A card under my pillow, a card balanced inside my shoe. One slipped beneath the closed lid of my laptop. Each time the Jester's image seemed to shift, small differences that made my stomach knot. His grin stretched wider. His eyes seemed sharper. On one, I could swear, a smear of red ran down from his mouth, almost like blood. I tried to throw them away. I gathered the cards I'd found and tossed them into the trash. But the next morning they were back, scattered neatly across my desk. Not the trash can, not the floor laid out as though arranged for display. I stopped trying after that. The dreams returned, stronger, clearer. He danced closer now, the Jester, his body twisting and bending as though his bones weren't real. He spun and bowed, his bells jingling softly in the dark. And always, he leaned close to my face. I could feel his breath against my skin, though I knew it was impossible. Each time I awoke just before he touched me, my heart clawing against my ribs. But one night, it wasn't a dream that woke me. It was sound. A slow, deliberate rhythm, soft but unmistakable. Clapping. Someone was clapping in the dark corner of my room. I sat up, my throat too tight to scream, and reached for the light. When the bulb flickered on, the room was empty except for a single card lying flat on my chest. The Jester stared up at me, his grin wider than ever. And for the first time, the painted eyes weren't just staring, they were looking. And they blinked. I stopped pretending things were normal after that night. The card that blinked was proof enough that whatever this was, it wasn't just in my head. I tried to convince myself I could ignore it, but the Jester never allowed that. He slipped into the corners of my life, waiting, grinning, reminding me that I belonged to him now. I barely slept. Whenever I shut my eyes, I felt the air shift in my room, as if someone else was breathing beside me. My skin prickled with the weight of an unseen presence, and no amount of blankets or locked doors could keep it out. The Jester didn't care about locks. He didn't need doors. He moved through silence, through shadows, through every dark space I had once thought was safe. The house itself seemed to change. Small things at first. Books on my shelf rearranged into crooked angles, chairs turned slightly, picture frames leaning just enough to make me notice. I knew I hadn't touched them. Then, more obvious things. My desk covered in cards again, though I hadn't collected them. My clothes pulled from drawers and draped in odd shapes across the floor, almost like figures bowing to something unseen. Every corner of my room mocked me, twisted into something that didn't belong. I thought I'd find comfort in avoiding reflections, but they became unavoidable. The Jester appeared anywhere I looked. The dark glass of the TV screen, the faint shimmer of my phone when it went black, even the polished surface of a doorknob, always in the background, his body in motion, spinning and twirling. My reflection was no longer just mine. I'd lift my arm, and in the glass I'd see myself hesitate while the Jester spun past, his grin splitting wider. Sometimes my reflection wouldn't move at all, as though it was waiting for him instead of me. The worst moment was when I realized my reflection smiled without me. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own face as my lips began to curl upward, though my body remained perfectly still. I backed away in horror, but the face in the mirror leaned closer, grinning, eyes wide with delight, as if it had seen something I couldn't. I smashed the light switch and left the room in the dark, but even without the mirror, I could still feel him, standing just behind my shoulder. Then came the box. One morning I woke to find all the cards arranged neatly in a circle on my bedroom floor. At the center was a small, square box I had never seen before. Its wood was dark, damp-looking, almost as though it had been buried underground. My hands shook as I crouched down, every part of me screaming not to touch it, but my curiosity was stronger. The lid slid open easily, and inside lay a mask. It was small, too small for a human face, but the design was unmistakable. White porcelain painted with bright colors, twisted into a grin identical to his own. Its hollow eyes seemed to pulse faintly, as though something inside was alive. When I lifted it, the porcelain was cold, unnaturally cold, and as I held it, I swore I felt a faint thrum beneath my fingers, a heartbeat. I dropped it instantly, the sound echoing too loudly in the room. The mask landed face up, staring at me with its painted grin. From that moment on, I knew I was no longer dreaming. He had crossed over. He wasn't waiting in photographs or cards anymore. He was here, in my world, leaving gifts, claiming space. That night, the scratching began. A faint, steady scrape from beneath my bed, like fingernails dragging slowly against the wood. I froze, every nerve in my body burning. The scratching stopped. I leaned over the edge of the bed, though I hated myself for it, and I saw him. The jester's face stared back at me from the shadows under the bed. Smaller than I remembered, but undeniably him. His grin was so wide it seemed to split his face in half. His eyes glistened wetly, blinking once as he dropped something onto the floorboards. It was another card, but this one was different. The jester on it wasn't static. His eyes moved, they blinked, and as I stared, the painted hand on the card twitched upward, pointing directly at me. I decided to leave. I packed a small bag without thinking much about what I needed, just clothes, my phone, a charger, anything that felt like proof I still belonged somewhere that wasn't this house. I moved quickly, hands clumsy with fear, as if doing something ordinary could break the knot of dread that had wrapped around me. The front door felt impossibly far when I reached it. My fingers closed on the handle and my whole body tensed, ready to pull the door open and run until I could no longer hear anything but my own breath. When I turned the knob, I froze. He was there on the porch, a silhouette framed by the dull light outside, not the small, tucked-away face from under the bed, but a tall, crooked thing that should not have fit in the space. His limbs were long and bent at odd angles, as if every joint belonged to someone else. He didn't move, but the air around him shivered, like hot air over a road in summer. For a second I thought maybe it was a trick of my eyes. Maybe the stress and lack of sleep had turned sunlight into something cruel. I reminded myself of the packed bag, of the open road, of the fresh air waiting beyond the porch. I stepped forward anyway. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the world slipped. The porch stretched into a long corridor, the sky above folding inward until it became a ceiling of old wallpaper and moth-eaten fabric. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a trap built of familiar things that had gone wrong. My throat closed. I tried to step back, to reach for the safety of the living room rug, but the hallway seemed to pulse under my feet like a living muscle. I realized then that the jester had not needed to stand where I could see him. He had been inside the wood all along, in the grain of the floorboards, in the shadow between my feet. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the world slipped. The porch stretched into a long corridor, the sky above folding inward until it became a ceiling of old wallpaper and moth-eaten fabric. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a trap built of familiar things that had gone wrong. My throat closed. I tried to step back, to reach for the safety of the living room rug, but the hallway seemed to pulse under my feet like a living muscle. I realized then that the jester had not needed to stand where I could see him. He had been inside the wood all along, in the grain of the floorboards, in the shadow between my feet. I retreated, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, even though locks had stopped mattering, and leaned against it, breath coming sharp and hot. It did nothing. The sound of laughter crept through the walls, soft and patient, and the lock vibrated, as though something on the other side tapped it like a toy. The house hummed with a rhythm that matched my pulse. Every picture frame, every lamp, every shelf seemed to hold a pair of watching eyes. I tried to leave through the back. The yard was a cold blur, and the trees bowed low over the fence like guests at a funeral. As I moved, the world folded again. The yard stretched backwards and then sideways, closing off like a fist. The gates that led to the street were miles away and then right beside me, and then vanished entirely. I realized I was no longer a person walking through landscape. I was an insect caught in a jar that had been turned and twisted until the lid fit flush against the glass. When I finally stopped running in circles, I hid in the bathroom. The porcelain edge of the bathtub felt oddly warm under my hand. I pressed my forehead to the cool tile and tried to steady my breathing. Mirrors were dangerous now, but the bathroom mirror was the only surface that felt honest, if only because it reflected what I did not want to see. I lifted my head and met my own eyes, my real eyes. For a moment, relief flooded me. My face looked tired but human. Then my lips tightened into a smile that I had not willed. The movement was slow and mechanical, like a puppet's jaw working on a string. My stomach went cold. The mirror did not show the jester. He did not need to be reflected. He worked in the spaces between images, in the small delays, the stutters. I watched myself from the other side of the glass and watched the smile grow, until it became a grin with the same sharp edges as his. My reflection's eyes gleamed with a strange hunger. My hands, in the glass, lifted to my face as if to touch it, and when they did, my skin felt brittle, like old ceramic that might crack if pressed too hard. I left the bathroom slowly, moving like someone who has learned to walk on broken glass. The house was quieter now, but the quiet was not peace. It was the kind that announces a storm. I passed the living room and saw that every card had multiplied. They lay in patterns across the floor in complicated designs I couldn't read. Facing inward toward the center where a single, small chair sat. On that chair lay the porcelain mask from the box. But it was different. It had been painted over with a new layer, and in the fresh strokes I could see shapes that looked like features, but not mine, not entirely. My heart lurched. The jester's gifts had become instructions. The house had not simply followed me inside, it had rearranged itself into a ceremony. The air smelled faintly of paint and something metallic underneath it. I stepped closer against every warning in my body. The mask's hollow eyes seemed to look past me, through me, as if measuring. As I reached out, my fingers brushed porcelain cold, polished, real. The lid of the box I had dropped earlier clattered open somewhere behind me, a small, sharp sound. I turned. The jester was standing just out of the light, his head cocked at an angle that made no sense. He did not move. He did not need to. Then the house laughed. It wasn't a noise from a single place, but from all surfaces at once, like wind through 1,000 tiny teeth. The lights in the ceiling dimmed and brightened in time with it. The cards on the floor shivered, and in the center of the pattern, where the mask had lain, something stirred. A shape pushed up through the floorboards, a pale, small hand, fingers curled like a child's reaching for a toy. The nails were too long, too thin. The skin was the color of old paper. It pulled itself up the last inch, and then, impossibly, a face followed. My face, or a version of it, smiling with porcelain lips. I don't think I've left my room in days. Time doesn't move right anymore. The clock on my wall ticks forward, but the hands jump backward just as quickly, as if the minutes themselves are caught in the jester's game. I've stopped trying to sleep. Each time I close my eyes, I feel his presence pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating, like he's lying across my chest. My breaths come shallow and ragged, and I swear I hear him breathing with me, inhaling when I do, exhaling when I can't. The cards cover every surface now. They line the walls like wallpaper, spread across the floor in perfect, endless patterns. Some are stacked in towers, too thin to balance but standing anyway, as though held by invisible hands. Their painted images shift when I look at them. The jester no longer repeats a single pose. On one card he kneels, head bowed low as though in mock prayer. On another, he spins mid-dance, bells frozen in a moment of movement. On a third, his grin splits his face too wide, stretching until the edges of the card itself seem warped. Each card feels alive. If I stare too long, their painted eyes blink in slow, deliberate rhythm. I tried destroying them once. I gathered a handful and ripped them down the middle. But the moment I blinked, they were whole again, scattered across my desk. The torn scraps remained in my hands, limp and lifeless, while their duplicates smirked at me from every surface. He doesn't let me win. He doesn't even let me fight. The mask from the box never left. It waits in the center of the room, perched on the chair like a throne. Its surface glows faintly in the dark, a pale shimmer that draws my eyes even when I try not to look. At first it was blank, just painted porcelain, but now it looks more and more like me. The lines of my cheekbones, the slope of my nose, the faint scar above my brow, all of them etched onto its surface in delicate strokes. The grin is wider than mine has ever been, but otherwise it's unmistakably my face staring back at me. Every time I blink, it seems closer to real skin, like the porcelain is softening into flesh. This morning, I woke to find myself on the ceiling. My body was still in bed, at least. Something shaped like me was. I stared down at my own form, lying stiff beneath a blanket, hands folded across the chest as though posed for a coffin. The skin of that body looked wrong, too pale, too smooth, like it had been coated in wax. My reflection in the window opposite grinned at me, clapping slowly, the hollow sound echoing louder than it should have in the silence. I blinked, and in the next moment, I was back in bed, staring at the ceiling as though nothing had happened. But my lips ached. When I touched them, the skin cracked slightly, leaving flakes of white dust on my fingers. The jester dances now, though I can't see him directly. His shadow flickers across the walls, bending over the cards, spinning around the mask, sometimes crawling across my body as if testing its fit. His laughter hums low in the air, rattling my teeth. I try to cover my ears, but the sound doesn't come from outside. It blooms inside my skull, spreading like a sickness. The worst part is how patient he is. He doesn't rush, he doesn't need to. Each night he takes a little more of me. My reflection no longer listens to me at all. It moves on its own, copying his dance instead of mine. Last night, I watched it peel its lips back in a wide painted grin and lift a hand in a mocking wave. I pressed my palms against the glass, but the reflection didn't match me. It pressed back harder, and for a moment, I thought the glass would crack. I don't think this will end with me surviving. I think that's the point. The jester doesn't kill, he replaces the mask, waits patiently because it isn't a mask anymore. It's a face, my face, and when the moment comes, I won't be here to stop it. I don't know how much longer I have. The porcelain on my skin spreads each time I wake, crawling down my cheeks, across my jaw, tightening around my throat. Soon I won't be able to speak, won't be able to breathe. My voice will be gone, but my grin will remain. If anyone finds this, know this truth. The jester doesn't haunt you, he chooses you, and once he chooses, there is no escape. He waits, patient and smiling, until you are nothing but another mask in his collection. As I write this, I feel the last of my skin tightening, hardening, cracking at the edges. My vision blurs as my reflection leans closer in the glass. It's still me, but not me, grinning with painted lips. I can feel him standing just behind me, breath tickling my ear, though I don't dare turn to see. The cards rustle like leaves in a storm, the bells jingle, and then I hear it, whispered in a voice that isn't his but mine. Your turn.